Let's take a look at SQL Server Management Studio. This will be our main toolbox for working with a SQL Server instance. I'm going to find it under my SQL Server 2008 R2 programs. I'm going to right-click and just pin this to my Start menu. It makes it easier to get to. Now, this tool is not intended for the end user. It is an administration tool. It will help us create and change databases, diagram them, report on them. There's a lot of stuff it can do. Now, there's no real point in opening SQL Server Management Studio without connecting to a SQL Server instance. So that's the first thing you'll be asked to do. And again, you can connect this to different SQL servers as long as you know where they are and what credentials to use to get access to them. I'm connecting to the local machine here, so I'm just going to use a dot for the server name. I had installed it using Windows Authentication, and I had named myself as the administrator of this instance. So once I connect, I'm in and I can do anything. Now, the most obvious section and the most useful initially is this area over here on the left. It's called the Object Explorer, but the name's not really important. This is the section that lets you drill down into different parts of the SQL Server instance you're connected to, not just the databases and the data inside them, but administrative stuff too. What are the users and the user identities that SQL Server knows about? What roles does the database understand? How, for example, would you say that a user called Bob should be allowed to edit the orders database, but not allowed to edit the HR database? That stuff is all defined in here. Now, when you're clicking around here, what you can actually do is see a little more information by selecting the Object Explorer Details pane from the View window. And when I have, say, my databases selected, I don't just see the names of them, but I can see their owner and their collation if I find that useful. But more than anything, you'll find that right-clicking is your friend in SQL Server Management Studio. You can select pretty much any of these levels, right-click an object in them, and you'll see a collection of context-sensitive options. If you, for example, select a database like the AdventureWorks database, you can drill down into tasks and see that you can take it offline or copy the database or import data or back it up or restore it. One of the common things you're likely to do with databases, you'll be curious of how much space they take up. So you'll find that right-clicking on the database allows you to go to Reports, where you have a whole bunch of standard reports such as disk usage, how much disk usage is this database taking up. Drill back down into Reports and I'll find things like disk usage by top tables, generating lots of really useful information for that. On the other hand, if you start to drill down inside the databases themselves and actually start to drill down into the tables, the things that hold your information, the right-click choices here will be different. You'll have things like select the top 1,000 rows or even edit the top 200 rows. You can even right-click the tables and say Design, allowing you to change the table and change what it actually means to be this data. And we'll see all of this a little later on. I do encourage you to explore around the Object Explorer for a few minutes if you haven't already. Now, of course, as with any advanced development environment, take care when you're doing this. You are working directly with the database instance, and if you decide to tell SQL Server Management Studio to delete a database, for example, or change a table, it will say, well, you're the boss, and it will do it. One example of a place to take care might be, for example, database diagrams. If you start working with some of these sample databases, you'll see a database diagrams section, and this is very tempting to play around with. Typically, the first time you click them, you may be prompted that the database doesn't have everything in place to use this. Do you want to create that? I'm going to say, yes, I do. Let me close the couple of reports I have open. What that then allows me to do is make a new database diagram based on the actual defined pieces of that database. In this case, I'm doing it on the database called AdventureWorks LT, and I see that I have a whole bunch of tables here, and I can just start clicking Add to add them to my diagram. Maybe I'll err on the side of just adding everything right now. If I close that, I see that I've got this rather large diagram going on here. In fact, up at the top of the screen, I can shrink that down. Let's say it's 50%. It's still a little big, so I can drag a few things around if I so desire. But what I'm trying to show is the point that this is really, really good stuff. And the ability to diagram your database reading from the actual structure of it is a great feature. But again, be careful. It's very easy to say, look at a diagram like this and realize that you don't need to show everything. You'll right-click one of these options and you'll see that there is the option Remove from Diagram right next to Delete Tables from Database. And the end result of selecting these things would be very different. So again, take care. Some great features, but be careful with them. Of course, everything that we're actually doing with this SQL Server Management Studio interface is generating commands that talk to the SQL Server instance. And if you're someone who lives and breathes command line operations, you can actually open up something called SQL-CMD, just typing in SQL command, and that will open up a command prompt to allow you to talk to the SQL Server instance. I could do a couple of simple things here. I'm going to say use AdventureWorks. And all I'm doing is typing a couple of simple commands to shift the SQL Server instance to look at the AdventureWorks database and then show me the top 10 first names from one of the tables. Now, I'm not intending to spend any significant time in the command line prompt here in this course. We're going to use the graphical interface. You can always take what you get there and put it in the command line later. However, we still are going to write a fair amount of code ourselves. We're just going to do it in SQL Server Management Studio, which is a much more pleasant way to do that. And it does also have some helpers for us. If I go to the View menu and select something called the Template Explorer, I'm going to see this section appear over here on the right. This is hundreds of pieces of boilerplate code we can use for the most common tasks in SQL Server. Everything from creating a database, for example, which starts to script it out there. We just go and fill in the blanks, all the way to advanced database needs, such as creating partition schemes, which can be a bit more complex. Now, if the idea of writing a lot of this code fills you with dread, we will see that quite a bit of our creation can also be done using the graphical user interface, but you will always be required to kind of come back and write a few commands that will be executed by SQL Server Management Studio. We will, of course, be using a lot more pieces of this application as and when we need them, but with these core ideas to get started, we can move on and start exploring one more tool.